Good morning. Welcome back to another edition of Wake Up and Ship More. I am your host, Joe from DevHub. I am going to talk about all kinds of different things here. If you're new to the show, we are focused on really trying to get in the habit of building more. We're trying to understand how to better ship. We are trying to do all the things that are related to software development, not necessarily just blockchain, but just in general. We are right now in the midst of talking about MVPs. We first talked about app architecture, which you can kind of go back and do. And we're going to do more on some of that stuff in the future as well. Yesterday, I introduced some of the concepts around like how you make decisions for, um, a MVP and like where does it fit in? What type of MVP do you actually need? Where does that all go in? Today, in this episode, I want to talk a little bit more about the MVP process, but also I want to talk about a specific case study and use that as the example because I think maybe that might help contextualize some of the topics that we were talking about yesterday. So let's just kind of dive right into some of this here. And so, yesterday, when we were talking about uh, an MVP, it really came down to this top part here. Like, do I have an idea? Can I execute? Do I understand what problem I'm trying to solve? And who's my audience for this? And can I show these different things here? And we talked about, a little bit yesterday of, okay, I need some kind of front end to show what this is going to look like. What kind of actual functionality do I need? What kind of actions are going to be in there? And then obviously, just like how do I collect feedback? And so we talked a little bit about that yesterday. So I encourage you to go back if you haven't seen that episode, and check that out. Also, here is we also talked about, again, like what comes into my decision making around my MVP. And sometimes it's something as simple as like, you know, uh, what is my goal, right? Why am I showing you this MVP? Like, what is the point of me building this trimmed down version of my like big vision? And so, and then what is the absolute minimum to actually build out to have something that's MVP? And then, that's some of the things that we talked about there. But I think it's really important that we kind of dive into, some more of this stuff here. And I was doing a little, uh, I was doing a little work yesterday afternoon, just trying to see if I could find some like good case studies around MVPs. And one of the things that I came across was that kind of as I mentioned on yesterday's stream is that like everyone has some different opinions of like what is a good MVP. And I think it's important context that like the concept of the MVP really was born out of a book and strategy called The Lean Startup. And this is kind of coming out of Silicon Valley idea of being able to, iterate quickly, move fast, get good feedback. It also, if you follow along in like software productivity stuff and processes and things like that, you may have heard of the concept of like agile development, and agile development is, works like with this hand in hand, right? Because I'm constantly iterating, I'm constantly shipping something. But what we're talking about right now is like that first phase, like my initial, like what am I getting out the door as my first version that are going to go to some audience's hands. And like, again, you really need to determine what your audience is. So I want to talk a little bit about this case study I found because I think that's going to be the best way to describe this all the way through. So let's change this setup here. Okay, so we're going to change how this looks a little bit here. So I found this. This is from this company, altar.io. I don't know anything much about them. I'm not necessarily promoting them, but they have this excellent case study, and so I wanted to make sure I gave them credit. So they used Airbnb as the example. I don't know if they actually did any work for Airbnb or they just did this as a case study, but this was exactly what I was talking about yesterday. So if you don't know what Airbnb is a booking platform where people can rent out like their own property to other people. It's essentially competing with like hotels and things like that, and it's been very successful over the years, and it's really grown quite a bit. But they started with an MVP, and them starting with that MVP, I think, is critical to really understanding, if they had any kind of product available. Because at the time, right, like when this was first being thought of, like there was nothing like it, and so they need to be able to actually show like what's going on. So the problem was here. So let's just talk this through together a little bit, because I think this will be really instructive when we talk about how do you determine what an MVP is going to be. So they first started with, what is Airbnb's problem? And look, this is a nice problem statement, and I'll pause right here and say, hopefully the project that you're working on, that you're trying to build, is addressing some kind of particular problem. And when we say the word problem, we don't necessarily mean that like something is wrong and you're trying to fix something. What we say problem is like, what is the point of your software essentially? Like why would anyone care to use your software? And that kind of sounds off the cuff and glib, but like that's what we're talking about. So here it is. Travelers around the world cannot find an easy way to book a room with a local or become a host. So the main existing offer for tourism accommodation is a hotel, which is not adapted to the preferences of millennials because it leaves them disconnected from the city and the culture. Okay, so that's what they're saying Airbnb's problem was. Now here is the part. This is very like terminology heavy, which I don't. Whatever. That's everyone's different choice. This is like very kind of like corporate-y, but whatever. Their value proposition, right? And so this is a fancy way of just saying like, again, how are they solving this problem? Airbnb's online marketplace to connect travelers with local hosts. One site can list their available space to local tourism, make extra money, and the travelers can book these unique places from the locals, saving money, hopefully, and getting a chance to interact with them. That was the original idea. So they realized now their audience is going to be two parts. And this is, again, what we were talking about yesterday, right? So who is in my audience, right? And this is, I think really important when I think about, again, what is my MVP? Because if I just made the booking site in this example for Airbnb, then I don't have my host in mind, right? Like, so I need to be able to see both sides of it. So it is, right, it's the traveler and the host. Both these are my audience. So my MVP has to actually serve both of them if I'm trying to get across the value right here of my product, the problem that I am solving for, the reason why I am building this app. This is my audience I need to be able to show something to. So that's a really important piece that 100% goes back to what we were talking about here of what kind of actions yesterday we talked about, like, needs to be there. What kind of, like, who is going to actually be using this, right? We need to really understand that. Okay, let's continue. We don't care. It doesn't matter so much about who's dealing with it today. Why is a better solution? Again, we don't necessarily need these two parts right now. You can look at what Airbnb's elevator pitch is. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about right now. Okay. So, what are the main assumptions though out of the elevator pitch? This is the part that I thought was much more important to get across when we're talking about, again, like, what is my MVP going to be? Like, what am I going to build first, right? So, what does a traveler need to actually be able to do? And so, uh, they want to be able to maybe be hosted in a private venue, have a genuine experience. Okay, so again, I need to be able to book places, right? Uh, they willing to share venues with total strangers. Again, so my booking system needs to allow maybe multiple things, so that's kind of ambiguous. Then they say travelers want to stay in a private venue on a consistent basis. So again, I need to be able to book it like a hotel, even though it's not a hotel. Okay, so that's just basically what we're getting at. The hosts need to be able to actually short rent out their stuff, right? They want to be able to do this multiple times. We only need to make a listing. So they need to be able to set their property to then essentially act like a hotel and be able to be booked like a hotel, except that in this example here, they are maybe off the market at different times, right? Okay, great. I don't care about the rest of this stuff. Okay. So, can you actually get to an MVP based off these main assumptions? Okay. And the answer is absolutely yes. Like, because again, like, we have now broken down exactly like who our initial audience is and how do we actually start to validate and how do we actually, again, let's go back to here. How do I actually get to a point where it's like, look, who is my audience? We know who that is. We say, yeah, can I just build a front end for this now that I know this? Of course, right? It doesn't have to be super fancy either, because I'm just trying to see and show how this will work, right? So, yep, we can do that. So we can have a front end that allows both listing and booking. Easy enough. What kind of actions need to be on there, right? And so I need to have some real actions. I can't really mock all of this. Maybe I can mock some things, but I probably want to have a lot of real actions on here. And then I need a way for feedback, right? So I definitely need a way for feedback. I need a lot of tracking in here of how things are being used and how like the booking system is working, making sure there's no like collisions and things like that. So we certainly want a ton of logging. We want ways for people to give feedback. So we can this fits all of the things that like we're talking about. So super straightforward there, right? Okay, so let me go here. Hold on, I'm just I want to turn my branding back on here. Also here. So they say, while building a non-functional MVP would be cheaper, it only gives us metrics of market interest. It's much more valuable to gain indicators of actual retention and actually show the app. This is exactly what I was talking about yesterday. Okay. Sorry, it's warm in my office today. So this is exactly what I was talking about yesterday. Like, there's a lot of times where like just the designs or just a Figma or whatever else is like not really appropriate. Like just having a non-functional MVP doesn't fit for this. And so when you're evaluating like what you're trying to do, can we do this? And so that's where, again, I really think it's important that you're like taking good effort and time to like actually go and like say, look, I can get this kind of feedback, right? So I can get this like smaller kind of feedback of like, hey, is this idea relevant? Like, does this make sense to you? That's what we were talking about yesterday. Like, does this idea just make sense? Sure. Like a design, a non-functional MVP, great. Like, you can certainly do that. But if I actually want to dive in and like get a sense of like, hey, do people understand how to do this? Like, can I show like what it looks like to have, a marketplace? Essentially, what is it going to actually be? So then I have to really start to think about like, what is again the actual minimum part? So here again, what is my absolute minimum to be able to show this? We come to the conclusion that a design is not is not my absolute minimum. It's too far below it. Okay, so we need to get away from that. So if I can't use the design, okay, all right, so the design is out. Okay. So I need to start to think about like what is the bare minimum. And so again, we're gonna need some kind of website front end, okay, and we're gonna have to have it into two parts here. All right, and that's gonna come down to again, right? It's the traveler and the host. Cool, right? So I need to be able to serve both of these people here. Okay. Additionally, and I think this is a part that is maybe maybe overlooked a little bit here is again I don't want to uh overdo it here as well. So even though like I have like this larger need to serve both of these, I think we need to be very careful about like what's in each, because you could easily spin out and like start having tons of stuff being built for these, and so we have to just be careful. So this case study does a nice job of breaking down like really simply like what is those minimum features, and like can we just focus on an MVP of like just those features. And so as a traveler, I want to see houses with prices and profiles with ratings, so I feel safe. And so that's an important part here, right? So it's not just about the listing. So the minimum is I need to be able to show like, oh, this is what it's going to look like. I need to be able to actually give people some more information. Have credits of some kind of referral system. Okay, so that's interesting that they determined that like a referral system was important as part of the MVP. Now, why do they think that? Well, in this example here, they're actually going for a full version 1 MVP, where it's like actually going to be used. It's not a beta. It is not just It's not just in like a test mode. It's like we want people to actually come and use this. So we want to be able to have some virality. So we need some kind of referral system. Interesting thought process. Certainly makes sense. Like if you're kind of going live, you want to capture attention and you want to reward attention. So that's a valid way. That's a valid component to all this. As a host, right? So I need to do some things here. So this is the other part of this, right? So we have two parts. All right, I want to see the applications of the travelers so I can actually accept them and I can feel safe who I'm allowing in. And I will say the original idea too around Airbnb was more around like you are renting a room in someone's house and they're there. So it maybe seems kind of wild. Like I know that's a lot smaller piece of Airbnb now. More people are using it as like I'm renting this out. Please don't be there, kind of thing. And then I have Airbnb, how to get the best results out of my house, including maybe like some incentives and marketing stuff. And again, this is going to determine like what based off of what your business is. And so from there, you can kind of start to iterate. Let me see if I can find a picture. If you don't remember or haven't seen it before, let's see if I can find a picture of like what the original Airbnb. Yeah, there's a. Let me show you that. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So here's one picture of it. So like when you would search, like like this is kind of how the search looked. It was like very simplistic. This was the logo. Let me find another good picture here. Where's the thing here? Oh, here's a good one with some listings here. This is a good picture because it has a before and after. So let me show you this picture here too. Okay, so like this is where it starts, right? And this is like where it ends. Here we can zoom in a little bit here. So you can see, some different things here. They actually had ads on the site, everything. And now like it looks more like this, and so it looks a lot better. Okay, let's go back here. So you can see there's like an iteration, like that. There's a growth there. So with these two things in mind, right? What are we building? And so this goes for like your project here, right? So it's just like we were talking about yesterday. So I have a website, I have both these things. So my minimum though here, based on what they're talking about, is I'm going to still need, obviously a backend. And like in that backend, this is where, like, again, I can't emphasize this enough for your own project, and you really have to take the time to go through the work of this. What is my absolute minimum? What am I actually having to build here? And I'm telling you, like, this is where people get caught up, and it can go bad both ways. It can go bad. I can overbuild, and I can like just do too much, and I've now built too much before I actually am able to do anything else. And now I've maybe had this technical debt or time sink or whatever else, and now I'm in a bad spot. Or I can go the other way and I just haven't built enough, it's not functional enough, I'm missing pieces, and I don't maybe have actual technical debt, but I am actually missing key features here. That is not technical debt that I have to go back to, it's technical debt that I'm just missing. And so like that's a problem in its own right. So you really have to be careful here. And so let me switch it. Oh, wrong. I'm switching here. We want to switch this. Here we go. So, I want to really be clear here on like when we talk about like what goes into the back end of this part of it, is you really have to determine, like, back to some of my initial discussions around app architecture, right? So like what is going to be in this architecture? If I need it, I'm going to need a database in this example, right? So I have my DB. I'm going to need all kinds of APIs. But the thing is here is like which, because as like you're planning and as you're thinking about like your product, there's a lot that can go into here. But again, if I think about my features that they were just talking about, again, I need to see housing listings, I need to see profile listings, I need to be able to actually have an action of booking something, I need to make sure like the schedules, like, line up, right? So I need to make sure that fits. I need to be able to have maybe some kind of communication, whatever. I have a whole series of APIs, so I need to be able to structure these two things together in concert of meeting, again, that bare minimum. Also on the back end, this is a tough case, but you have to think a little bit about how your app is going to get used. And this is an MVP, so we don't want to go crazy. If you've ever tried to use any of these different services like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, whatever it might be, one of the things you might see is like, uh, there's a million different options you can get into, and like all of a sudden your costs start ballooning, and next thing you know, it's like you have a $2,000 a month bill, and no one's using your app yet, right? So you have to really be careful. You have to be very selective on how you start to do things. So this is where part of this is actually, you actually think of like resources here. Okay, like what are my minimum resources here as well? And this also maybe goes into like personnel. So like this is both like, so we'll call this like infra, we'll call this people, right? So I have infra, I have people, I have both these considerations here. And from that, I then have to just say like, okay, what is gonna get me going. The beauty of cloud stuff is, you can actually scale pretty easily if you need to. And so you can start pretty small, and I would always suggest start on the smallest possible. Same thing goes like on chain, right? So if I'm doing something that now involves like on blockchain, right? So blockchain is part of this, then I need to really make sure that I am being careful of like what is actually being used here. Can I use testnet, right? Can I use my whatever my chain's testnet is? Maybe. But in this example here, like if it involves like booking something, I don't want it to be on testnet. We want it to be on mainnet because it needs to be, it needs to, because so testnets can get like wiped out. Different issues can happen on testnet. It's a different level of reliability, and also like we don't want this whole set of like my early days was only on testnet, and so my transactions are all there, and so now I moved to mainnet, and I'm trying to bridge these things, or I'm trying to migrate data. You need to think about really actually being on mainnet, even at a smaller scale. So that means again, like for this example too, like what are the minimal contracts that I need? You know, how complex does my contract have to be? Um, it's a lot to consider. If you have anything that's financial going through there, you're gonna probably want your contract audited, and so that's a big cost, and that's hard for your MVP. So that actually has to be a consideration here of like what actually needs to be part of that. Okay. Then I need to actually put all the pieces together and actually have like a V1 of my product. And when people are using my product, this all goes back to the step yesterday. Is this part here? How am I going to get feedback? How am I going to track what's actually happening? How do I know that people are actually, using this? That people are actually part of this and actually, learning from this. So that's what we really want to make sure that we're actually addressing. So this becomes now the considerations for my MVP. There is this great graphic to here. Now let's switch back to here. So when you think about like how you move up through your MVP, that it shouldn't be like this top one, right? Like, and this is like when I'm trying to get to a car, right? It's not like I'm having pieces of my car, and now like that is how I eventually get to like from MVP to a bigger thing. This is more like, hey, like we're gonna start at a skateboard. We're gonna move to a scooter, and we're gonna continually move our way up through our iterations to get to that car. And the reason why is because when you go this top route, you run into a couple different issues that I think are not always discussed clearly to new developers. One is that like you are essentially segmenting off parts of your app in order to have an MVP. The problem is that like one, from a building and architecture standpoint, this could end up being a nightmare like super fast. Like you could actually really spiral into something that like your architecture is just not making sense. You are piling on technical debt. It's just not a great route to go. I would never suggest that to someone. Also, too, when you start just having all these different components, like part of the problem becomes that you are now component managing and you're not really product building anymore. And that might sound similar, but it's actually different. Where I'm not holistically thinking about my whole product anymore. I'm simply thinking about like, oh, well, I have this component, and yeah, it doesn't really work exactly the way I want to do. We're missing stuff, but once it connects to the other part of the component, right now I have, two wheels, right? And now I have the chassis here. It's all going to work together. It's like, well, that's not a great approach, and now you're constantly like you're not providing a good user experience. You're not serving your own developers and your time and everything else well. Your feedback is not going to be as relevant. Where if you start with the other approach of like, look, here's the smallest version of my app. Okay, this works. This app works. It does what it needs to do. This is the smallest version of it. It doesn't have to look super pretty. It doesn't have to be really like super full featured. It does what it needs to do, right? It's as you know, I don't know if this translates to other languages and countries, but like the meat and potatoes of my product, right? It's just the basics. Where I then can grow and start adding in other features, expanding my product, right? And I can do that in a way of like, if this is version 1, maybe this is version 2, this is version 3, and I'm iterating, I'm making it better, I'm expanding on it, and now I have this much better experience overall of leading towards the car, right? So that's where I think you need to start to consider your own product. And that's why in the example here and talking about, Airbnb a little bit, is it really made sense to use this as an example, because you could see where like just thinking about a product like Airbnb, there's a million ways that you could go. Like your first version could be super bloated right off the bat. But if you're taking that time and you're just pulling back a little bit here and saying like, look, what is my true version 1? What do I need to start getting this in people's hands? Who's going to be my initial audience? Can I have that initial product? That's all stuff for me that I think is super important. And that's all we need to really focus on. So if we pull all of that together, now we can start to actually build our first product. And then like this little graphic here at the bottom. Okay, let me zoom in so you can see that better. So now like I can go through these different steps and I can start to expand. I can start to think about, okay, here's my basic of the APIs. Like, which APIs do I need for this first version, for my skateboard, Hey there. All right, look at what happened to my other camera. Let's see if we can get everything back here. All right. Let's change it at least to this camera, which is not my normal camera. All right. What is happening here? Just pause and we'll be right back. Hey, we're back. We are back. All right. So, gotta live live. I don't know why that happened. Anyways, we're wrapping up here. Anyways, this part. So let's just quickly recap, and we can end on this here. I will definitely say that we want to make sure that, again, with our MVP, that we are being very considerate of what exactly lets us go from A to B to C. And again, in that graphic, let's see if I can still show that graphic here, because I think, again, this is a great graphic, right? This is a really, excellent breakdown of, that's not what I want. Here we go. Of like the different steps here of how we want to approach this. So if I can go from all these different parts of like, again, what is the bare minimum, what's a little bit more, and still a full product. And in each step, this is a full product. I think that's the important part, is a skateboard is a full product. A scooter is a full product. A bicycle is a full product. Where here, like, this is not a full product up here. If I'm just building components and I'm just sticking components together, I do not have a full product until I get to the end. And now I might not get to the end. I might not have money. I might not have time. I might not have resources. I might not have validated my idea. People might see my thing and be like, what the heck is this? So, we need to be cautious about that. I also want to really make sure that we're emphasizing again how you make decisions about what you decide to build. And this is something where, again, if you're going to take time and try to, actually build here, that we talked about down below here, if you see, of like what APIs are being needed here, what resources are needed. And this, again, if I'm taking this approach here, I can scale accordingly. So I'm going to leave you with this part here, that we really need to be thoughtful and plan how each stage will go. Your MVP really needs to actually be thought of as the bare minimum of a product that can get you feedback and actually works, and then you can iterate. If you're taking any other approach, you're asking, again, you could still be successful. There's no like perfect right answer or wrong answer, but you really need to just be thoughtful about this, because you can put yourself in a bad situation. At this point, again, we're going to talk more about some building stuff, some architecture stuff. I definitely want to dive into more of, what does it look like to start to plan out your APIs. I think that's a big part that sometimes people forget. So when, you're designing your front end, and you're designing your whole app and your architecture, the data flow is really paramount to how your product runs. I would say, unless you're building a game, even game needs data, right? But unless you're building like a game, I mean, every other product otherwise is really data driven. Everything's a front end for some kind of data set. So you need to really be considerate of how are you getting that data, where the data coming from, how are you structuring everything. And so we're going to talk about API. We're going to talk about that stuff. We're going to talk about pulling data from on-chain and putting data on-chain as well. And we're going to talk about the blockchain parts of that as well. That's all coming up in future episodes here. So plenty more to get into. If you haven't, you can join the Telegram group below, and you can always ask questions there. You can go back and watch any of the replays on our YouTube channel. I really encourage everyone to, take time and go through all of that, and come back with questions. Hey, I just watched episode 2. Can you explain more of this? Things like that. So the Telegram group's a great place for that as well. We will be back soon with the next episode, maybe tomorrow, maybe early next week. But I certainly encourage you to continue to check these out. I mentioned early on that there are going to be some actions that are going to build up towards something, and people who are regular watchers, people who are participating, will build towards something. So if you hadn't already, you can claim this NFT here, and that's kind of phase 1. And then the next phase is coming up next week. So I wanted to give it a couple weeks for the first phase, get people introduced, and then we'll jump into the more stuff. I hope this is informative for people. Please ask questions. Please feel free to suggest topics. Bring things up. This can be certainly more interactive, and I want this to be helpful to people as they're trying to build. So this has been a little bit more MVP. Hopefully this gives you a better sense of like how to think through your MVP. Nothing is prescriptive. You can always, again, you need to make your own decisions on your product, but this is hopefully the framework of what you need to actually do it. So until next week, or until next time, this has been Wake Up and Ship More. I appreciate everyone coming out and watching. Please share this if you thought this was helpful, and please join